What's up, everyone? Welcome to today's video. Welcome to the Video Game Fright School channel. Thank you very much for tuning in. It appears that consoles can't catch a break when it comes to the conversation about performance. When you look around the conversations on different video games, somewhere somehow performance comes into the conversation if everything is not meeting these so-called expectations, especially when you add it to the fact that when Sony started to bring out their PS5 games, they were able to develop these games with 60 FPS in mind and different resolution settings. Even though these particular games use different techniques to achieve them, they still marketed them as exactly what it is that they wanted people to perceive. What I mean by that is, when they were marketing a lot of their games, they never told you that when they were using their, technologies to render games at 4K, they were doing so using checkerboard rendering. This is a technique where you pretty much will render half of all your pixels and then use some really very brilliant tactics to then fill them in and then scale them to, match that resolution. So in reality, if you actually wanted a true experience of the game, you're better off in native settings regarding your resolution. But Sony, Microsoft, and all of these folk don't necessarily say that. They pretty much will drop these things and just, hope that the untrained ear doesn't necessarily find out. For the longest time, this worked until we started to see more and more games drop at 30 FPS, sometimes showing some really severe issues when it came to performance overall. I remember when Gotham Knights came out, there was a lot of talk about the performance of the game. The game had some issues where at the launch time, it was dropping some FPS under 30. The developers eventually fixed it, and now it's locked at the 30. I think they fixed it within, a few weeks. And then when it came to the PC version, that also had a lot of issues because the game was just not scaling well. But overall, after all the fixes, everybody had to come down to the whole reality that the 30 FPS game was kind of here to stay. Even A Plague's Tale came out at 30 FPS, and then you could use variable refresh rate to play at 40, and then eventually the developers went ahead and scaled down the rats in the game to run at 30 FPS, thereby being able to get the game itself to pretty much perform at 60 FPS. After making a lot of different changes, they also rendered a lot of the NPCs in lower resolution, made a lot of compromises to be able to get them to run at that particular frame rate. When you add to the conversation, you see conversations here like split screen for Baldur's Gate 2, or if you wanted to maybe even go into much more of a conversation, you look at, say, an announcement like the one for Lords of the Fallen, where the news pretty much has, put people in a really interesting place. I mean, Lords of the Fallen graphics options have been revealed, 1080p upscaled at 60 FPS, 2K, which is 1440 at 30 FPS. So this is the performance that people are going to get. And when Richard Ledbetter went ahead and concluded that, the 30 FPS game was going to show up, and him saying, if you actually think that you need to want, if the performance is a top priority for you, go get it on a PC platform. It's always there for you. A lot of people thought that, he may have not necessarily been, sensitive to the fact that some people were expecting these on console and it needed to be so. Now reality is done. We don't have even 5 new games that have come out in this generation that can give you native 4K at 60 FPS, even though when they market these consoles to you, they tell you things like true 4K or 1440p. Do you see it? Capable of 8K HDR or 4K 120 FPS, and then they put in the fine print for software that actually supports this. Basically, if the game can support it. Now, we need to look at the technical side, because I think this is going to go ahead and pretty much help a lot of people in the conversations. First of all, what I would encourage anyone who has a console to do is to go and watch this video by Digital Foundry. This is a video that says, its title is PC Gaming on the Xbox Series X CPU, AMD 4800S Desktop Kit Review. They go over how they were able to get their hands on an Xbox Series X unit, which is pretty much, something that's very cool. In fact, this was like an answered prayer for me, because I was hoping that one day we'd be able to get a way to actually test console hardware, even though we're not going to get the exact same, conditions, but at least get something close. And lo and behold, They were able to get this because somehow AMD decided to recycle Series X defective units. Basically, they had a small defect. They shut down their memory, their GPU area, and basically the CPU is all that's working. And then they sold it out in desktop kits. So they added a PCIe. You can see here that an NVMe port is added in a 24 pin, and also another port here with pretty much everything you need in a motherboard: USB, Ethernet. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, a sound card, and so on and so forth. So Digital Foundry was able to take this and test it with a whole bunch of other games, and they also compared it to other CPUs and setups in that are somewhat close in different generations. And ladies and gentlemen, the performance is not even close. The Ryzen 7 Pro 4750G, which is also another desktop kit, is something that you can say is somewhat closer. And even this particular CPU destroyed, for the most part, your AMD 4800S, which is in the Xbox Series S, in pretty much every single test, except maybe a few where they were on parity. But other than that, when you look through all of the different games they showed, like Call of Duty, or even other games like in this case Crysis Remastered, you could see some performance closeness. In that case, I think it was this game, and I think another, I can't remember. Well, yeah, this one here, Ashes of Singularity, which is basically a CPU limiting game. That one just pretty much just limited almost every CPU. It's a very heavy game. I don't know if anybody plays it on console, but it's very interesting. Cyberpunk 2077, the 4750G is about 18%. In most cases, they saw that it was actually 20% faster. You go to Metro Exodus, look at the difference. It's doing 89 FPS. Metro is doing 128, and I think they paired the 7900 XTX, which is AMD's flagship GPU, best GPU anyways right now, to this CPU to see how it works. And as you continue to go, you continue to see that this hardware, or this hard CPU is not really that strong when it comes to all kinds of, metrics that we see on PC for very cheap. Yes, it does 60 FPS depending on how the developers develop the game, because not every game is going to be able to do 60 FPS. Shoot, it even does over 100 FPS in some cases in games like CSGO, which is optimized to the core in terms of gameplay experience. But not every game is optimized like CSGO, so that's going to be an outlier in this particular case. If you go look at, say, some other games like Gotham Knights, when they actually went ahead to do the comparison for Gotham Knights, I thought that was very interesting because I don't think they went ahead and did comparisons with other CPUs, but some games they were able to show their different, performance metrics. And so what they did was they threw it in there. They gave you Gotham Knights, and Gotham Knights was able to hit maybe 50, 46 FPS, but it wasn't necessarily stable. So the game, in my opinion, could probably not do that 60 FPS consistently. And then if you throw in multiplayer, I think it made sense to lock it at 30 FPS. Even the guys here at Digital Foundry agrees, even after they said, and this is because they didn't know. And I like the way Richard Ledbetter said in this article, he didn't know why a game like Gotham Knights was not running at 60 FPS. He actually mentions that. And behold, somewhere, somehow, because of, their curiosity, he went ahead and was able to get this desktop kit and found the answer to his question. Let me see if he can find it. Verdict, Gotham Knights on PC, where we find the game, blah, 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 blah. To put it brutally, Gotham Knights 30 FPS nature on console appears to be down to the authorship of the game as opposed to the raw capabilities of the hardware. Well, this particular conclusion that he made is speculative. It says it's only speculation, of course, but based on what we've seen, the brute force power of the new machines is used to make the game that likely couldn't run well on a PS4 and Xbox work even at a basic level on PS5 and Xbox Series X hardware. By extension, it's not the best example of why a transition to 30 FPS console gaming may be coming. Well, if you go back and look at their test here, apparently it seems like the limitation compared to, or in the context of the way a game is made, is a very big deal. And every game is going to give you different, metrics in regard to how they actually work. I think Flight Simulator was the more interesting one because Flight Simulator is sitting at 33 FPS. Whenever you actually move to, console settings in a sense, or native settings or whatnot, the game is not giving you much more, in some areas. So, you can get some good performance out of it. But then as you continue to, make your way through the game, you eventually realize that in some spots where the cities get dense, the game pretty much starts to drop, its FPS. But on consoles, they have all kinds of different fun ways that they used to actually go ahead to render stuff like this. Then we moved to Starfield, where the conversation was also very interesting. A lot of people called me a X-bot when I told them that, your consoles are not geared to play heavy games. Once the rubber meets the road, you start to see performance tank. You start to see performance start to, gain, give you some more interesting things. Like here, Todd Howard defends 30 FPS choice for Starfield. As impressive as Starfield was at Summer Game Fest, many have felt apprehensive about Bethesda's choice to lock the game at 30 FPS, prompting Todd Howard to reassure the fans that it will benefit the game at launch. Because Todd Howard probably didn't want to go into all of the nuances in terms of development, so everyone's got to be careful of the things that they see. Because from gameplay and progression to customization and visual fidelity, Starfield is the culmination of every Bethesda sandbox released since Oblivion. Starfield's planet will blend procedural generation with handmade elements in hopes that they will offer an experience, blah, blah, blah. However, to explore the worlds, the wonders of space in Starfield, Xbox players will have to accept a 30 FPS limit. Xbox players accepted a 30 FPS limit the moment they bought into this, because this does not really give you the full story. It just gives you all of the marketing terminology, the dimensions. Oh, it comes with the controller. Oh, the design, all of this stuff. But then if you actually go ahead and look at, say, the hardware, you'll see where the limitations already is. Looking at the CPU is a custom Zen 2, 8-core, 3.8 gigahertz. The only thing about a CPU like this is it doesn't necessarily function like the other CPUs that, you guys got to see on this particular, test. These CPUs that they compared the Xbox CPU to are just monsters in their own right. Now, yes, in some games, the optimization can actually make the performance good or even close, like you see in Call of Duty. But in some games, things actually take a whole different turn. So this is something that a lot of people have to pay very close attention to. When you come down to the GPU, you see that the GPU, claims to be an AMD RDNA 2 GPU with 12 teraflops and actually runs at 1.8 gigahertz. Whereas on the Series S, you have 4 teraflops and 1.6 gigahertz. So in some case, or in some sense, they've cut down a few things here. Two things at the moment they hit GPU and RAM, and that is basically reducing the amount of teraflops and the frequency of the GPU and also the RAM. I think this has limited the Series S even much more in its capability. And the problem with this is it's as limited as a Series X, but now developers have to then develop for, this in mind, and then also figure out how they're going to go ahead and optimize for this. So basically, if developers are probably kind of bracing whatever the game is, whatever they have to offer, I think this is probably going to be their target. And then anything else that comes as a result of that can then now be, enjoyed on the Series X or the PS5. So that's probably the paradigm that they're going to take. The 6 gigs of RAM that's different here also kind of causes a little bit of an issue because of the way that, the consoles run, because they're running Windows, and a lot of their work is actually somewhat, related to the combination of the CPU and the GPU. So you're also going to see limitations there. At the end of the day, a lot of the 30 FPS conversation is not going to go away because players were expecting true 4K, 4K 120, possibly 4K 60. They were seeing Sony go ahead to do things like that and say, hey, man, we're giving you 4K. We're giving you 4K 60 FPS. We're giving you 1440 a performance mode, not knowing that checkerboard rendering was what they were using to be able to pull it off. And by the way, there's a really cool video on checkerboard rendering that's actually done by this channel called FinFET. And they talk about the whole process and how it's actually done, and the different methodologies that you can use to, pretty much generate the pixels to fill in the blanks. It's a very interesting, in my opinion anyways, it's a very interesting way to look at things, because these 4K resolutions that they're promising are not really 4K. It's just to give you, some sort of a better performance without a lot of cost on the machine. And you actually have to play that game because the machine itself is actually really limited already. and the PlayStation is not far off from the Series X in terms of their difference. So regardless of how you want to chalk it up, you're still in a closed down ecosystem, a closed loop. The difference between your Series X or your PS5 and even any of these other PCs is you could change components. You can go change your CPU, but on your console you just can't. So what I recommend is anyone who has maybe a Series S or X who may be looking for better performance, you might need to start looking at the possibility of upgrading to a PC. And don't be worried about the cost. PC hardware changes so fast and updates itself so fast because NVIDIA, Intel, and AMD are constantly punching out hardware. Old hardware eventually gets cheap. And old hardware in the next 3 years is already more powerful than the console by many, many, many eons in terms of the differences. So you will get to benefit from the so-called, in quote, old hardware, which is pretty much everybody that's sitting on a Ryzen 5 7600 right now is pretty much, going to be, at some point going to be upgrading, and you're going to be able to get their hardware for cheap. You're going to be able to get used parts. In fact, the used market sometimes in the PC realm will put pressure on the new market and keep prices in a realistic sense. I know the last few years have been crazy with everything going on with mining and Bitcoin, and so it seems like it's not something that is attainable, but that's not really the case. If you actually are able to figure out how these things work, you can leverage the fact that we have a lot of new hardware to be able to get some, in quote, old hardware, but old hardware that would still beat the PS5 and the Series X in performance. This is how people get into PC gaming. And I know a lot of people, whenever they look into, say, things like the Steam survey of, players and what their major hardware is, they make fun of players. They make it seem like a lot of players using, the 1650 or whatever it is, like this Zubitech post over here, when it says the most used GPU on Steam is the GTX 1650. Yo, that doesn't make any difference. People using the 1650, if they get a little bit of money, they can get a better GPU and trade this GPU and trade up. At some point, they'll be able to scale to the point where they're able to beat the new consoles. If they go in, if they want to change their their PC build, they can go ahead and save some money, get a combination, buy a new chip, new board, new RAM. Micro Center has a bunch of stuff like that. Like Micro Center has so many deals that go on. You can see how let's see, Micro Center deals. You can see how they have like a lot of different combinations where you can pretty much pair components and buy them for very, very cheap when it comes to computer parts and so on and so forth. I don't have a Micro Center close to me, but they sell a lot of bundles, bro. Like, it's insane. Let me see if I can find a bundle here. I get a lot of stuff in my email from them. CPU bundle. That's what you need to find. CPU bundle. It's not showing anything here, but they send a lot of stuff out there, and you can go ahead and bundle some really cool stuff like what you have here. I went ahead and just opened up my email so that you guys could see this, but they have some really crazy bundles for stuff in AM5. It's wild. Now, yes, a Micro Center is not easy to get to if you don't have one close to you. I don't have one close to me. I literally have to hope that I drive 3 hours or more from where I live if I really wanted to get it. But again, this is just a convenience or inconvenience. I could just go on like my local Facebook marketplace and get some components together, and then I'm Gucci. So by the time you're spending a lot of money or whatever it is trying to buy another hardware from the console manufacturers that will limit you, you can just pretty much start putting that money towards upgrading to a PC, buying a small PC. You don't have to build, I think a lot of people feel like they have to build the latest and the greatest PC in one fell swoop. That's going to cost you a lot of money. What you need to do is you need to strategize your PC to be able to leverage upgrades. Like if you want to build in the AM5 ecosystem, it's going to cost you a little bit more, but you might want to eat the cost using, say, a bundle like this. This to me is a very, very powerful deal. Like you get 32 gigs of RAM, you get a motherboard, and you get a $300 Ryzen 7. This already obliterates console. Sure, your GPU is going to be a little bit more expensive, and then it's going to make your costs go up. But if you get a bundle like this, you slap on a small GPU and kind of hold your breath for a little bit. At some point, you're going to be able to leverage a better GPU because you're going to go ahead and trade in the old GPU. You're going to go ahead and trade in some of your old, parts. You're going to save some money, and then you get that GPU. And a build like this is going to run you 2 generations of console without any problems. I mean, already this is going to probably be giving you something where you can play at 1440p, 60 FPS native, almost any game that you throw at it without any problems. It's a better machine. You can even develop a video game with this if you want it. And I know people will say, well, but all this to match the PS5. No, you're playing checkerboard on the PS5. You're playing checkerboard and upscaling and all this stuff. These are games you're playing, basically using all these really cool techniques, which is brilliant in my opinion. But we need to be able to, make the distinction between what we're seeing, because FSR, DLSS, all of these things are here to be able to allow for developers to scale, a lot of their games to match these resolutions and still perform well, in a sense, so that they don't have to basically tell you, oh, we made the game in 720. And then when people find out they made the game in 720, like Final Fantasy 16, they start to freak out, and then they start to use it as a dig at one another. That's not necessarily what needs to happen. And if you don't care, then it's fine. But understand that the ecosystem that you're in is an ecosystem that is locked in a specific way, an ecosystem that doesn't necessarily seem like or not necessarily, an ecosystem that can't do anything about it. I cannot upgrade this machine even if I wanted. The only thing I could probably add is storage, which doesn't do anything. I can add extra 1 terabyte or whatever that Microsoft is selling. In the case of PlayStation, I can add me another NVMe. That's about all I can do. To me, that's like buying a camera. Even a camera has an upgradable path. That's way better than a console. Golly, bro. So that's the video that I wanted to make. I wanted to go ahead and have this discussion because I remember that I said I was going to circle back to this conversation. I told myself that because I knew we were going to hit the wall at some point. Can you imagine all of the games that are now going to be flooding these consoles? Can you imagine all of the different performance walls they're going to hit? I mean, we're already seeing it now with what's the name of the game I just showed you guys? Baldur's Gate, which has the split screen that the Series S is not, that the Series S has probably not given them the best experience in terms of optimizing. But again, that's a whole different conversation. They just need to focus on it. They'll be able to squeeze it in here. It's not too big of a difference. I know many people think it's like a huge difference. It really isn't, especially when you kind of understand the hardware. All they got to do is just work on, really cool ways of getting the game to run on the Series S, and they'll be able to get the job done. But again, it's just one of those things where as a development studio, they're still learning to kind of like get things done and understand, what their capabilities are. Because other studios are releasing their games on all platforms without any problem. They just are the studio that has always kind of focused on 1 port at a time, but this is the first time that they're going to be doing 2 ports at a time. And they tried 3 or 4 ports, and that almost destroyed them. So they kind of backed away. They stuck with 2 ports. And if Microsoft would have agreed, they would have pretty much been able to get the game out on the Series X and probably waited out the Series S version. But it seems like Microsoft might, I don't know, the game comes out next month. There might be something that is worked out where they say, okay, the co-op split screen on the Series S might come later so that the game is released for everybody on the single player side. But I don't know what Microsoft is going to do. They set the rules. It's their console, but I just hope that they will never market these things like this ever again. And if they do, players ought to sniff this nonsense out as quickly as possible. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk about this stuff hopefully soon in another one. Peace out.